Good evening. I'm Marion Dry, Chair of Class Act HR 73, and it's my honor to welcome you to this special event, Resist, a rapid response training presented by Class Act HR 73 and Justice Aid, featuring the National Immigration Project. This evening's presentation is part of the Class Act HR 73 year-long Democracy at 250 project. I now want to introduce you to Therese Steiner. She is a founding member of the Class Act and a current member of the board, as well as a former Justice Aid board member. And she also co-leads the Class Act Justice and Civic Engagement group. And I'm going to invite her to begin the program now. Therese, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Marianne, and welcome everyone to our training. Each year, Justice Aid picks an issue, a theme related to access to justice, and a grantee partner working on the cutting edge of that theme. And for 2026, Justice Aid could not have picked a more timely and relevant issue than the criminalization of immigration, and a more impressive partner than the National Immigration Project. The National Immigration Project is a membership organization of attorneys, advocates, organizers, and community members that litigates harmful immigration policies, coordinates rapid response hubs, advocates for affirmative laws and policies, trains thousands of lawyers across the country, and educates thousands of community members on their rights, how to protect themselves and their loved ones. Last year alone, over 17,000 community members and 8,500 lawyers attended their trainings. We are honored to have them conduct this training tonight. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sirine Shebaya, who has served as the executive director of the National Immigration Project for the past 6.5 years. A Yale Law School trained attorney, Sirine brings extensive experience in civil rights and immigration as a civil rights and immigration lawyer, including with the ACL, to her role overseeing the National Immigration Project's many complex initiatives. Sirine will be joined by two of her colleagues at the National Immigration Project for this training, Caitlin Bellis, the Director of Advocacy, and Gracie Willis, the Rapid Response Coordinating Attorney. Over to you, Sirine.
Thank you so much, Therese, and thanks to everyone who is joining us tonight. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you, and we truly are very energized by your interest in this conversation. I'm going to quickly sort of take you through just the highlights of the agenda that we'll be going through, and then give a little kind of framing context, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Caitlin and Gracie, who are really going to be giving the meat of the presentation today, or, the tofu. So the agenda, we're going to sort of start by just doing a high level, kind of setting the stage and sharing a few key things about the 2026 context based on our experience and the work that we've been doing. Then we're going to do a segment on what rapid response is and what are the different sort of components of it and roles that people can play, frameworks where different types of folks can plug in if they want to. And then we're going to do like a little segment on knowing your rights and knowing your reality, because of course, in this moment, people can have rights, and those rights don't always necessarily, find themselves observed or implemented. And so we're going to do a segment on that. And then finally, we'll be closing out with some calls to action for all of you. And so without further ado, I'm just going to give a little bit of stage setting about what is going on in 2026. So over the past year or so, we've seen really that the Trump administration is just trying to deport as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, and to prevent new immigration to the United States. And the way that the administration is carrying out its deportation agenda has really been very violent at times and not really kind of observing basic legal norms and principles that traditionally one would think that regardless of the administration would be observed. And so we really are in a very distinctive moment, which is shaping the way that rapid response has to be set up and also, how we think of responding to that moment. The first thing we're seeing, and this is probably not surprising to any of you if you've been accompanying the news and are sort of engaged enough to want to be here, but there's been a pretty dramatic increase in arrests within the interior of the United States. In prior administrations, there's been a tradition of, not going after people in certain locations, like let's say schools or churches or places like that, hospitals. But unfortunately, we are seeing people regularly being arrested at previously protected locations. And we're seeing some pretty broad targeting of workers who have public jobs, like day laborers, car wash workers, restaurant workers. We just are seeing this kind of massive campaign, essentially, to pick people up in many different parts of the country. And, we're also seeing some pretty significant and obvious racial profiling, which is something that we've brought a lot of litigation about and have sort of been winning injunctions and things like that in court. The third thing I'll just mention about this broad kind of landscape of interior arrests is that there also have been rampant arrests at immigration courts and at check-ins where people go to sort of diligently report to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And unfortunately, people who are showing up at their court hearings and who are reporting to check-ins are regularly finding themselves arrested and detained. We've also seen a landscape where every path to being released from immigration detention is being cut off, and where immigrants in the situation are not even getting the benefit of a bond hearing, which is like such a basic and not really sufficient even kind of due process protection, but even that has been taken away. The default is to detain everyone. And we are finding some pretty intentionally cruel conditions within detention centers, and also places being used as detention centers that are not intended for that purpose. So we're seeing hold cells that are supposed to be processing centers that are only used for 12 hours, packed from floor to ceiling, essentially, with standing room only, and people spending days and days there. And we're seeing really terrible conditions in places like Louisiana and, other places that have large detention centers. We're just seeing a lot of, kind of abuse and neglect of people in those detention centers. We've also seen a pretty aggressive push by the administration to just deport people to random places. So there are circumstances where some people have protection from deportation, for example, to their own country due to international laws and their application within the immigration system in the US. Like they have fear of persecution, or there's some other reason why they can't be deported to their own country. And this administration has very aggressively tried to deport them to other countries, oftentimes that they have absolutely no connection to. So it's just been a very dramatic situation. And then we also saw the administration trying to use these arcane laws to just round people up and send them places. And we saw that at the very beginning of the administration with the application of the Alien Enemies Act, the rounding up of people from Venezuela and also some people from other places and sending them to SECOT. And that was sort of something that really took a lot of litigation and fighting to kind of wind down and still carries a lot of terrorizing effect on the immigrant community. We're also continuing seeing a hugely inflated budget for the Department of Homeland Security and for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And right now there is this budget, fight that is ongoing in Congress, where I think we've been very pleased to see a willingness not to provide a lot of funding to these agencies. But even within that context, if you look at the budget today versus what it was, even as early as 4 years ago, the increases have just been very dramatic. And right now, the agency has a budget of $170 million. And then we are also seeing kind of an end and a cutting off to any pathways for relief. So like in the immigration context, there are a lot of settings where, you could apply for maybe temporary protected status, or you actually have available like a real pathway, like asylum or special immigrant juvenile status, or different things that actually qualify you to get status in the United States. And we're just seeing, the administration essentially cut all of those pathways off and really try to actively stop people from taking advantage of them. We're seeing people being arrested when they go to their naturalization interview, things that before were either really rare or actually unprecedented. So, in the face of all of this, how are communities responding? I think sometimes people ask, like, what keeps you going, or how do you maintain the hope that things will be different? And I will say, for me, the inspiration always comes from the resilience of the communities that we work with and the incredible mobilization that has been happening across the country to kind of like respond and stand with neighbors, but also from within communities themselves to really try to kind of claim their power and educate themselves and do what they can to stop the worst things from happening. And so that is, sort of the frameworks that we've been seeing across the country and some of the things that we've been doing to support people in those situations. There have been rapid response networks emerging all over the country that we've been providing different kinds of support to and also building sort of regional infrastructures on top of. There's been a lot of protesting. You all have seen, different places like California and Minnesota and even, DC and elsewhere. And then there's also been a very robust community of people who are coming together to do ICE Watch. So either like watch what is happening within neighborhoods or also watch what's happening at courthouses or accompany people to different things that they may have to do at the immigration agencies. We're also seeing, and we are actually a very active participant in this landscape, but there are these projects that are being set up to represent people in federal court in habeas petitions, which is a sort of abbreviated civil case that you can file in order to get released from detention. We have projects running in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region, in Louisiana, Mississippi, and sort of parts of the Southeast around those two states, and in Minnesota. And so those have been like really critical mechanisms to get people out of detention. And then finally, we're seeing the emergence of even stronger and more robust mutual aid networks that are making a huge difference to, support families who might have had a loved one detained or kind of find ways to cover kids or spouses or, any of those different, impacts on communities and people kind of supporting each other through those mechanisms. So that's just kind of a general overview of the reality of the very harsh situation that we are in right now, but also the resilience of communities and how people are fighting back. And with that, I am going to introduce very briefly again to kind of keep the focus on the training and the session, but you can read more about them in the bios that were placed in the chat a little bit ago by Diana. So my colleagues Caitlin Bellis and Gracie Willis are going to be taking you through the substantive portion of this presentation. Caitlin Bellis is the Director of Advocacy at the National Immigration Project, and in that capacity, she's been leading and sort of rallying a lot of resources towards community members and the people who are supporting those communities and kind of like designing training programs to help people access their rights, as well as supporting state and local organizing in different places. And my colleague Gracie Willis, who is the Rapid Response Coordinating Attorney at the National Immigration Project. Over the past year, she has been, working in many different parts of the country to set up regional rapid response networks, and also to sort of have an ear to the ground and support rapid response in local settings where that's needed, and to provide the resources that people might need in those particular moments where things are emerging. And, both of them have like an incredible amount of expertise that is particularly relevant to this moment. And I think we'll turn it over to Gracie first.
Thank you so much, Sirine, and thanks for having us here today. We're really excited to be here. So I'm going to take us through just a few minutes on what we mean when we talk about rapid response. We'll say a couple of really broad things about it, and then we'll narrow in from there. Let's go to the next slide. So let's just start with sort of a really broad view of rapid response. And as Sirine mentioned, enforcement has been ramped up, and that looks a lot of different ways. It certainly looks like the occupations of cities that we've seen, but it also looks like more insidious ways that ICE is in communities, that ICE is utilizing police in communities for enforcement that isn't always as observable or as shareable on social media as where we've seen these really high profile occupations. So when we think about rapid response, we think about the different ways that enforcement looks and how to be responsive to those things. And the way that we approach rapid response at the National Immigration Project is in centering impacted people and what their needs are, seeing emergency response as part of larger movement work. So we have this one piece of a much greater puzzle. We also emphasize mutual aid and community building, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then also acknowledging the links between ICE and policing and the inherent racism of policing and its impacts on communities of color. Let's go to the next slide. And so some more sort of broad things about rapid response, because it really is a shorthand for a number of different actions that people can take. And those actions can either be after someone has been arrested by ICE, and those would be both of the agencies, ICE and CBP, which are both under the Department of Homeland Security. Or even sometimes we can think about rapid response as happening before, and that's where we're going to talk a little bit more about preparedness. So we've got this sort of framework of before, individualized enforcement, and after. Rapid response requires trust, and that's something we talked about a little bit in the last slide. And it is also generally very localized because of this need for trust building. Folks who are at risk are obviously in a position to make sure that they are as protected, they and their families are as protected as possible. And so it's really important to have that trust built. So when engaging with rapid response networks, folks can expect what we think of as vetting. I will say when I started getting involved with my local rapid response network, I talked with 2 or 3 people before I was invited into a meeting, because we just have to be so careful these days about the way that folks who are oppositional can infiltrate these spaces. Rapid response also requires follow through. So it often involves things that are going to require a task afterwards, whether that's sending videos, providing narratives, showing up to a shift that you've signed up for, or doing direct follow-up with an impacted family. It's part of that trust building is the importance of following through on a commitment. It also involves staying vigilant in communities. This involves having a little bit of a shift in how we see what might have been everyday interactions. So seeing a family pulled over by police on the side of the road, maybe we develop a practice around stopping and observing what that interaction turns into, rather than driving by and saying, oh, I'm sure it's nothing. And also knowing our communities really well in the areas that might be targeted. One really important thing that we have found in this work is that rapid response is much more successful when people work in collaboration and not isolation. And what that means is working together in groups rather than having this sense of, oh, I can go out and do this, because what is most helpful to communities is building a sense of patterns. What are the trends? And that's something that we all build together. This is also can be very deeply exhausting work, and doing it alone is not as strong as doing it with a team. And then also doing it with a sense of mutual aid as opposed to charity, thinking beyond what are the bare necessities that somebody needs into how can we conduct this work in a way that is life affirming. And again, this is why we do that in collaboration and not isolation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we talked about rapid response as being highly local. The next question is, well, how do I find my local network? There are different ways that these networks and groups engage with people who are outside of like the pre-existing group. Some groups are loud and proud. You can find them on Instagram, on Facebook. They're doing interviews. Other times, these groups are being highly protective and a little less publicly available, and it might just mean a little more legwork. One place that we can direct folks is to a spreadsheet that we coordinate in conjunction in partnership with the Ready to Stay Network, NPNA, and Informed Immigrant, that has a list of networks that have sort of opted into their information being shared. And those hotlines are for people to call when they have an issue, either when they see ICE or a family member has been apprehended. So the hotline numbers on this sheet are not necessarily for calling and offering volunteer, but the names on the list can be a good place to start in terms of finding, okay, can I send a direct message to this person on Instagram? Can I find an email address? Is there a way to reach out and start to get involved if that's something folks want to do? And we'll go to the next slide. So let's get into a little bit more about what rapid responders actually do. I saved this one for a little later because rapid response, again, looks so many different ways depending on a lot of factors, including how many volunteers are there, how many reliable volunteers are there, what are the needs of the community, what have folks asked for, what are the resources we have access to, and even like the state of enforcement. A rapid response network in an area that doesn't see a lot of arrests is going to look a little bit different than somewhere like Minneapolis developed into, for example, right? So, and somewhere that has an immigration court or somewhere that has ICE check-ins might have those places built into their rapid response offerings. So, some of the things that we have seen in our work are things like Court Watch. Sirine mentioned this. That can involve either immigration court or somewhere like a county or municipal court where ICE can show up at any time. We've heard reports of people showing up for the driving without a license docket, and ICE is just there picking people up. So having volunteers in courts, again, whether it's immigration courts or county municipal, like state courts, can be really useful to understand if ICE is doing any enforcement in those locations. Accompaniment, again, accompaniment is a word that can have a lot of meanings, but that can be anything from driving people to immigration court or immigration check-in appointments, or to places like medical appointments if people aren't able to drive safely because they don't have a license, because maybe the state doesn't offer licenses to undocumented people. That might be an opportunity to accompany folks to do kind of like the daily tasks of going to appointments and things like that. Rapid response, again, can also include this sort of preparedness side of things, know your rights presentations and preparedness clinics, where there are all sorts of toolkits that help people get involved with the tasks of, okay, if something happens to me, here's the information that I want written down somewhere. Here is a list of where my documents are that will be helpful if I need them. I put verifiers and constitutional observers, sort of, they both have asterisks next to them because they are one of the higher profile rapid response tasks that we see, but largely ICE arrests happen very, very quickly. And so observers like verifiers or constitutional observers aren't always able to get there in time. And we hear that again and again across the country, that places with occupations like Minneapolis, like Chicago, LA, there was an ability to capture ICE and record what was happening because it was happening in these sort of larger sweeps. But across the country, that's not always true. It might be as quick as ICE in a vehicle outside of someone's home, watching them leave for work. When they stop for gas, ICE grabs them, handcuffs them, throws them in the car. There's not really enough time for a verifier or observer to get there, but it's still a really important network to develop, and one that does have a lot of burnout in it. And so having volunteers who are able to show up for those shifts, and even one of the other items on this list is patrol. Even if there's not necessarily a report that somebody has been arrested, knowing the rapid response networks locally will know the parts of town that it's helpful to have people drive around and see if anything is happening, see if there's any suspicious vehicles. Hotline operators is another task. On the slide before, we talked about those hotline numbers. Somebody's got to answer those phone calls. And so that is often somebody who has some language ability other than English, although some hotlines have interpretation services that are accessible. And again, this is another role that burns out a lot because people call, it can be that people call a lot, and it's oftentimes things that the hotline isn't necessarily equipped to handle. And so a lot of it is doing some referrals and knowing the network and the rest of the area to know where to send folks. But when things get really hot, when there's a lot of activity, those hotlines can be really busy. And then they sort of will often dispatch verifiers or confirmers to go out, either record the ICE activity or follow up with loved ones and family members to offer support and mutual aid. Other options are business canvassing. This can be really helpful. We saw it really effective in New Orleans, where canvassers would go out and talk to businesses, and almost every business had a sign in the window that said, like, ICE is not welcome here, signs up for both customers and employees or people who were working at the business about, like, know your rights information. And seeing that around a city can be a really meaningful statement, and it takes people just hitting the pavement to do it. Also, of course, legal support, whether this is attorneys who are supporting on representation in people's immigration cases. Sirine also mentioned habeas petitions. There's all sorts of legal needs that folks have both before and after an enforcement or an arrest. Also, things that are legal support that aren't or that doesn't need an attorney is something like an intake specialist, somebody who can help call or meet in person with folks who are in detention and go through a series of questions to find out what happened, what that person's goals are, refer that information to an attorney so that they can figure out what their options are. And along that line, also jail visits and wellness checks. There's some groups around the country near detention centers that do some really incredible work around visitation and wellness checks for folks who have been apprehended. And then along the lines of sort of post removal for folks who can and want to engage in harm reduction deportation plans, family and loved ones for somebody who has been arrested and doesn't want to sit in detention, doesn't want to fight their case. It can be helpful to just help, like, guide a family through different options. Again, these are all things that should be done in conjunction with a network, and different networks are going to look different ways. Not every rapid response network or the different branches within a network are going to do all of these things. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of legwork to talk to this person and they say, oh, we don't do that, but there's another organization that might take volunteers that does. Then you call that organization and say, okay, well, we do this with volunteers. We don't have a training for another couple weeks. Call back later. As y'all can imagine, everybody in our practice area is quite stretched right now. And so it just might take a little bit of legwork to find exactly where to slot in. Let's go to the next slide. And so again, just trying to think about the role and boundaries, because whenever we get pulled into these worlds of rapid response, of really emotional decisions and really emotional situations that people are finding themselves in, it's important to understand the contours there. So first, obviously, listen to the needs and goals of impacted people. The role of rapid responders is often just to observe and report. It can feel like sometimes, well, I don't know if what I did helped. Just the observation and the reporting and pulling in data so that we can see these larger trends can be incredibly helpful, as can doing things like providing solidarity and community, contacting loved ones and family members, and reminding people of their rights in the moment. Again, working in collaboration, not isolation. Organizers with rapid response networks will generally have guidelines about stepping in if something is happening, like an arrest. And it's really important to follow those guidelines to keep both that entity safe and other observers and organizers. So things like stopping an arrest, disrupting proceedings, or speaking for anyone done in isolation can actually do more harm than good. I think with this, I'm handing it over to Caitlin. Oh, no, one more about mutual aid options. I won't go through these step by step, but we wanted to put together just a list of what mutual aid can look like in these contexts where folks' needs can be really varied. Anything from childcare, referral lists, doing some legwork and research about what organization or entity could help someone with what their need is, buying gift cards and groceries, and doing some neighborhood watch work as well. And I think with that, I'm actually handing it over to Caitlin now.
And thanks, Gracie. For my portion, I'm going to walk folks through their Fourth Amendment rights in various contexts. And before we do that, though, we need to introduce this concept of rights versus reality. So we have been introducing most of our trainings with community members, and honestly, just a lot of our conversations with community members, with this idea that we can tell you what the law is, but that is not the same as telling you what we think they're going to do in practice. And we would love to tell everyone this is the exact way that you can be safe doing XYZ, your rights will be respected, but that is just not the case. And so we just need to be very clear that we know we are in touch with reality. We know that ICE is violating rights left and right, increasingly violent, and we need to acknowledge that. At the same time, we do believe that the Fourth Amendment matters and that it's important that we insist on these rights because we don't want it to become normalized, that ICE can just violate them, that people don't care, or that we're willing to give them up. And as we'll discuss later on, evidence of Fourth Amendment violations can be really helpful in court cases of a large variety, and then also in shifting public opinion. So even though we know that rights are being violated, they still matter. We're still going to talk about them. So I'm going to go through the Fourth Amendment. For folks who may not remember, the Fourth Amendment is the one that protects against unlawful searches and seizures. And when we're talking about the Fourth Amendment with respect to immigration agencies, we are primarily talking about ICE and CBP, and we are also talking about them just in the context of administrative agencies enforcing civil law. There are some differences when it comes to police enforcing criminal law, but it is the same Fourth Amendment in both contexts that limits the power to search and arrest. People have Fourth Amendment protections where they have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and so the degree of protection varies depending on the person's location, because in different places we have different expectations of privacy. And one way I like to talk about these rights in these different places is by framing it like when ICE is in a public space, they can do anything that any other person in a public space can do. But in order to invade someone's privacy, they need to have some kind of authority, some legal basis to do that. And the amount of authority, the strength of that legal basis, varies depending on how strong the person's right to privacy is. So the greatest Fourth Amendment protections are in the home, and it is always worth reminding folks that without a judicial warrant signed by a judge or without consent, ICE cannot enter a home. We can think about it like, again, what can any person do versus what can ICE do? Can your neighbor knock on your door? Yes, ICE can also come and knock on your door. Can your neighbor ask to come in? Yes, they sure can. But can your neighbor come in without your permission? No, that's not allowed. And so neither can ICE. They will almost never have a judicial warrant signed by a judge because they are relying on administrative warrants issued by their own agency. And the fact that those administrative warrants are issued by ICE, but issued by the same agency that is enforcing those laws, is the reason they don't give them the power to enter homes. And so the key is to avoid giving consent. And so we emphasize for folks these things. I'm also going to touch on the leaked ICE memo where they asserted authority to enter the homes of people who have final orders of removal without a judicial warrant. But first, we're just going to go through what is an administrative warrant versus a judicial warrant. So here is an example, an administrative warrant. As you can see, it is signed by an ICE officer. It is issued by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and it cites the Immigration and Nationality Act as its authority. So some of the key components, again, it's that it's issued by an agency, authorized under the INA, and it is signed by an officer, not by a judge. Meanwhile, this is an example of a judicial warrant. A judicial warrant is issued by a federal district court, and it is signed by a judge. And even judicial warrants have limits. If the officer trying to execute a judicial warrant is doing so outside the scope of time that the warrant authorizes or on a different date, then it's not valid. If the officer is trying to do something different than what the warrant authorizes, not valid. If it names the wrong person or the wrong location, not valid. So it's a judicial warrant and it has to be correctly executed. Just to focus on these key components of a judicial warrant, issued by a district court, signed by a judge. Now, there was that leaked memo that says, again, that ICE officers can enter the homes of people who have final orders of removal without their consent and only with an administrative warrant. The law has not changed. ICE is just putting forth this interpretation of the law, but that does not actually change constitutional law, and it does not, under literal decades of Supreme Court precedent, give them the authority to enter a home without consent. However, again, returning to that rights versus reality framework, talking with folks in the community, we have to acknowledge that now they run a risk if they refuse entry to ICE. So we have tried to offer some language around, I don't consent to you coming in, but I fear harm if I don't, so I'm going to open the door. And we very strongly suggest, if it is safe to do so, recording these interactions. Hopefully no one who is on this webinar will encounter this, but just wanted to address it. All right, next is at work. So most workplaces have both public and private spaces. And a private space is anywhere the public cannot enter without permission. That may look like a break room or like a locker room. It could be an employees only. For in like a hospital, sometimes you can't even make it past the front desk without, without permission if you are just a regular member of the public. And just like any regular member of the public, ICE can enter wherever any person can enter. An example I like to use is a Starbucks. Like anybody can walk into the lobby of a Starbucks, but generally there's an employees only section at the back where they, have storage, or again, that like break room, and folks can't go in there. Often it's protected by a lock. Having signs that say this is a private employees only space, or locks can emphasize that's private and protected. And so in order to enter any of those private spaces in a workplace, ICE needs a judicial warrant or the employer's consent. So it is the employer who is able to consent in that instance. And these are really important rights to know. And one of the things that some of the folks we work with have been doing on the ground to try to protect people, to try to protect workers, is going door to door and making sure that small businesses know their rights in refusing ICE entry, know how to make it clear what spaces are public and private. We often get some questions about some specific situations, and in apartment buildings, again, what anyone in the public can do, ICE can do, so they can access public areas if they are generally open, but anywhere that's private, the same protections apply. And also, if someone is a tenant, if they're renting, the landlord cannot allow ICE or CBP to enter the apartment without the renter's permission. It is the tenant, the person who lives in the house, who has the right to consent to or deny entry. There are also specific rules related to construction and agricultural jobs. For example, if there's like an open field that people are working in, again, like any person could just kind of stroll up, so can ICE. Public street, same situation. So that's part of why we saw them targeting day laborers, car wash workers, people selling flowers on the street. These are folks who cannot do their work in private. They have public jobs, and that is part of why ICE was going after them. Okay, in the car is also a little bit of a complex situation because cars are both in public, they're on the street, and private. The interior of the vehicle is a private space. An administrative warrant allows ICE to make arrests in public places, and they are allowed to pull people over if they have reasonable suspicion, and they are allowed to make an arrest of someone in the car if they have an administrative warrant or if they develop probable cause. And we'll get into that distinction in a moment. But ICE and CBP still cannot search the interior of the car without a judicial warrant or consent. And they also, in most states, only the driver, this is actually based on state law, only the driver is required to show identification if they're pulled over. So people should know their rights based on where they are in their state, whether passengers are required to show identification. However, agents can order passengers to exit for officer safety. And while that is supposed to be limited, in reality, they are often going to order everyone to exit the car. It is very important that folks don't run. That is likely to result, as we have unfortunately seen tragically, in violence. And also for folks who are undocumented or non-citizens, it can also result in them being barred from immigration relief and criminal charges. So the best thing to do is to comply. All right, so what about in public? Can any random person approach you on the street and start asking you questions? Yep, they can do that, and so can ICE. But can anyone keep you from leaving if you don't want to talk to them? No. And neither can ICE. And here in interactions in public, there are two different levels of authority. So that ICE might need and might develop. The first is reasonable suspicion, and that is to make a stop, just to stop someone from going on their way so that they can continue the questioning. And then arrest, which requires a higher degree of evidence and authority, and that is probable cause. That administrative warrant that I showed you several slides ago, that is probable cause if for the person who is named in that administrative warrant, like that that is like a record of the evidence that they have, that someone has reviewed it. And if ICE has an administrative warrant that names a person, they can arrest that person in public without anything else. They're just allowed to do it. If they don't have that administrative warrant, both the stop and the arrest have to be based on evidence. And when we say evidence, the regulation actually says specific articulable facts. So they have to be able to name and explain what it is about this person that they think gives them the authority to stop and or arrest them. And they are not allowed to base this exclusively on race, ethnicity, or racial profiling. But we know that in reality they often do. They also often base their arrests on what people tell them, because folks are, often feel compelled to respond to authority, and it's just a very natural instinct. But if they don't have a warrant, in addition to that evidence to make the stop and arrest, they also have to have some reason to believe that the person is a flight risk. So often the key in these interactions is not to give them any evidence that they don't already have. And the key questions, and this is especially true for folks who are citizens, and this is like more in the context of a protest, are, am I free to go? And am I under arrest? But those are great questions for everyone to have in their back pocket. We have also heard reports of ICE and then just publicly saying that they're going to do this, of demanding the ID of anyone they encounter. That is illegal, and you are well within your rights to refuse, but they may arrest you if you don't comply. So what we've been the way we've been talking to folks about this, especially in the hubs and in this kind of like rapid response context with volunteers, is to decide in that moment, is this a protest moment where I'm going to like insist on my rights, or is this a safety moment where what is really important is that, I make it home today. And so, I mean, literally in the sense of I make it home today, I'm not trying to, anyway. So I'm going to move on. This is the point actually where I think we're going to ask to pause the recording, and I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Gracie.
There was a comment earlier on in the chat actually about the size of ICE's budget. And yes, that is absolutely correct. I think it is way more than 170 million. That was just like, I think that was more about like a rate of increase or something like that. But so call to action. I mean, I think my understanding is that the audience on this call is mixed, and that there are some attorneys and some non-attorneys. And there are a number of ways that people can kind of jump in to help if you feel so inclined or moved. I believe that Gracie circulated earlier during her segment a link to a spreadsheet that has been put together with information about different accompaniment programs or hotlines or things of that nature. And one way that you can help and support and kind of jump into action is actually to connect within your own community and see who is doing that work and figure out like what kinds of volunteers they need, because there are always sort of more bodies needed, right? Like to answer phone lines, to do translation or interpretation, to like even kind of record or keep data about certain things, or even to show up places to bear witness to what's happening. So given that is the case, sorry, I am just realizing that maybe we went to the call to action too quickly, but I'm just going to keep going. So this is this would be kind of an option for people who are not attorneys or who don't really have the capacity to take on immigration representation. Another option is if for attorneys, I am actually putting a link in the chat that people can use to sign up for to represent people in habeas petitions in some of the parts of the country where we're running habeas projects. So I mentioned this at the beginning, but we have set up with local partners projects to screen and route cases to attorneys while also training attorneys and doing technical assistance support, creating templates, things of that nature. But so those projects are based in Louisiana and the Southeast, as well as the DC, Maryland, Virginia regions. and then also in Minnesota. And so if you are an attorney and you would be inclined to provide that kind of assistance, the volume is really high and there is no end to the need for that kind of representation. And so we have a form that, is there. This one is not for posting anywhere public. It's just something that we circulate at our trainings or to people who, we've spoken to before. And so you can complete the form if you are an attorney and you would like to join in. And then, of course, there is the evergreen call your congresspeople and tell them not to fund DHS. So I will stop there and turn it back over to the organizers. I'm sorry if we jumped the queue and went right to the call to action, but here we are.
Hi, I'm Kim Coaxum with Justice Aid. And on behalf of Justice Aid, I want to say thank you to all of you for attending and for our wonderful presenters from National Immigration Project for sharing with us the realities on the ground, what we can do, how we can be allies if we witness something, and how we can assess our individual risks going forward. So thank you to Sirine, to Caitlin, and to Gracie for presenting with us today. So we have listened, we have learned, and now it is time for each of us to act. To further the work of National Immigration Project, one thing that they need is financial support. Whether the number is 170 million, 170 billion, what we do know is that the ICE's budget, Homeland Security's budget, 170 billion for last year versus 5 million for National Immigration Project. So even if those numbers are slightly skewed, and it's probably skewed low, for every dollar that National Immigration Project had last year to spend, ICE had $34,000. So what can you do? In a word, you can donate. You can donate today, if possible. Social justice work is heavy, but it can also be fun. And this is where Justice Aid steps in. May 19th is our New York concert at City Winery. The theme this year is Rhythm Nation. It's going to be kind of a global music sound. And our concerts are amazing. So join us. Buy a ticket, give a sponsorship, bring some friends. Come out. It's cocktails, it's dinner, it's amazing music, and it's wonderful fellowship. And you can feel good while you're doing good. That's one way that you can support. 100% of your ticket, 100% of your sponsorship will go to National Immigration Project. If you can't attend, if you're not going to be in New York or you've already got something booked for that day, you're going to miss a great concert. But if you can't attend, please go to justiceaid.org and donate. And do not think that if your donation is $5 or $10 or $20, that doesn't matter. Every dollar, as we've shown and we've heard today, really makes a difference. It really does matter. And why should you act? You may also think, my lived experiences, this is not personal to me, this isn't relevant to me, but we've heard citizens are being arrested, citizens are being deported. The abrogation of anyone's civil rights really impacts us all. Overreach doesn't stop. So please, again, go to justiceaid.org, give as you are able. All of it is appreciated. All of it, 100% of it will go to National Immigration Project to support them in the work they're doing to ensure all of our civil rights, dignity for all of us, and safety for all of us. And again, thank you for supporting Justice Aid, Class Act. Thank you again for another wonderful forum and another wonderful partnership. And to National Immigration Project, we're here with you. We're all supporting you. We're all fighting together.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for attending. This has been an absolutely unbelievably informative panel. I want to thank the National Immigration Project and Sirine and Caitlin and Gracie. And we do have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. There have been a couple of questions about individual responsibilities. And could you talk a little more about if you are an individual and you witness something and you want to record it on your on video, how do you know who to send that video to? And how do you know that? There's been a question about if someone tries to break into your car window, what do you do? And if somebody tries to take your phone, can you throw it in the bushes or what should you do? So these all relate to individuals who may witness something in a Home Depot parking lot or something and be by themselves and not in community or in a group.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start on that and invite Caitlin and Sirine to weigh in as well. Absolutely, we want folks recording things on their phones as much as possible when they're observing. As we've talked about a lot in this presentation, recording is not unlawful. Record from a safe distance is number one. Anything that is sort of impeding ICE's ability to arrest someone is going to be a riskier behavior. And is going to start getting into territory where somebody could be arrested themselves. So if somebody is seeing that and recording it and has the video and doesn't know where to send it, I would start with those rapid response hotlines. If that's the situation, if you're actively seeing someone get arrested and that person is a non-citizen and the ICE arrest or the arrest is by ICE or CBP, call a hotline number. They will have questions that they ask that will help them get information. They will likely have a number or a place to text or upload the video. And that's going to help them not only work to try to get in touch with that person's family and loved ones, but also build their own understanding of how, where, when, and to whom these arrests are happening. And that kind of building out of trends can be really useful. I think we answered the question about throwing your phone in the bushes. Don't do that. If ICE is or if an officer is telling you to turn over your phone, they're gonna see you throw it. They're gonna build probable cause. They're gonna build all sorts of things that can be used against you. What we recommend are safe phone practices and better data security. So using encrypted apps to speak with people. And then if going to a protest, consider what's on your phone and consider whether it makes sense to do things like turn on airplane mode, remove certain apps from your phone, take off facial recognition or thumbprint, biometric ways to get into your phone, create a longer touch key password, different ways that just make it more protective, a more protective digital environment. And there's lots of guides on how to do that. I don't know if there was anything else that Caitlin and Sirine wanted to add into that.
No, I think you covered it great.
Okay, I also heard somewhere that if you're documenting with your phone and you're asked to move back, that you should keep the video going to prove that you've been moving back to the officer's request.
Yep.
Yeah, Caitlin?
Oh, I was just going to say that's correct.
Okay, that's correct. Good. We have a question. Does NIP do trainings for businesses who want to be sharing this information with their employees?
We have not yet done one that is targeted specifically to like business owners, but our community defender trainings, which happen every month, are open to all members of the public who are interested. And we have put on several related to Fourth Amendment rights that cover workplaces. And we get, oh, sorry, I was on parental leave. And early last year, they did put on a few very specific to businesses. So my bad. Yes, we have. And now we do monthly community defender trainings that are open to everyone. We've covered Fourth Amendment rights multiple times. We get a really large turnout for these webinars. And yes, so yes.
And I'll just chime in to say that I posted the link to our request a training form in an answer, like in a written answer to this question. So basically, like there's the offerings that we give publicly, like the community defender trainings that are not, specific to an employer audience or another audience. But then we also have a form where if there's a particular business or group that is requesting a training and would like to have one, we will sort of consider based on the content and whether we're the right people or not. We did one for management company last year that was focused on housing. And then we also did one for like a network of shelters in different parts of Maryland. So, I think it sort of varies. We may not be the right people for everything, but if there is a particular need, please feel free to fill the form and someone will, circle back with you and we can figure that out from there.
There's a question, are U.S. citizens subject to ICE arrest for delivering food sustenance to undocumented immigrants? Or any other of the activities that you mentioned, how people can volunteer? And what do you do if you yourself are followed to your house?
I'll start off in saying there is a federal law 1324 that criminalizes smuggling, harboring, and transporting. We haven't seen how far the federal government wants to stretch that statute, but I think currently, like on the federal level, we haven't seen those kinds of arrests for like delivering food. There are, I will say, like increasing state laws about things like transporting people. I live in Texas, and there's all sorts of laws about transporting folks. And I would say there have been a couple of examples of observers who have been followed to their homes, whether like in sort of this like menacing way. I think it's going to depend on like, on a case by case basis, like what to do. It's hard to give one size fits all advice for that situation. I would say like being inside of a home is very protective. Also, like if ICE is running your plates, they're going to know what your address is. So the kind of advice of like don't go home might not apply. Yeah, I think it's hard to give kind of broad advice about that. Caitlin, do you have anything else that you would add?
Only that we would refer you back to the earlier part of the webinar when we think about these things about like what is riskier behavior and what is less risky behavior when thinking about these questions. But no, Gracie, I think you did a fantastic job.
Okay, we have a question regarding people who are detained in facilities. What's the best way to navigate survival or connecting with loved ones for help?
Yeah, so it can be really hard. And people, because it's a federal system, people are often detained very far from their loved ones and their communities. And one of the requests that we get is for resources on how people can locate their loved ones in ICE facilities. There are a couple of different tools that are available, including an ICE online detainee locator, although that is slow and often contains errors. People can also search by commissary systems. So the ways that people who are detained in these detention centers can receive money. And sometimes they'll have more up-to-date information about who is in the detention center. So if someone knows roughly where someone is detained, sometimes they can search a couple different detention centers, commissary systems to find them. But that is one of the reasons that detention is so coercive, is that it can be extremely isolating from all of the resources and loved ones that people have. And there are very few limits on where and how ICE can detain people and make those decisions.
I have a question based on an experience I had, which I was approached by ICE imposters who went to a farmer's market with a specific to foment some activity and resistance that they could post on social media. Is this a common thing? And do the same protocols apply in terms of, you don't know they're imposters necessarily, but in terms of reporting them and contacting a rapid response network, et cetera?
I'm not sure how frequently. We don't track that kind of thing specifically, but yeah, it's always appropriate to ask to see someone's badge. ICE officers don't really have badge numbers in the same way that police do, and so when people are trained on things like Cop Watch to ask for a police officer's number, that may not be as relevant with an ICE officer. But we certainly know that there are groups out there and organizations or certain organizations that track these kind of these groups that are more prone toward like vigilante kind of behavior. That's an awful thing to have gone through. I don't have a sense of how frequently that's happening.
One thing I will just add to that is that those kinds of examples I think are really powerful to bring to elected representatives. And they show how normalized it is for ICE to just be extremely violent, that people believe that people acting like this are ICE. I think your elected representatives will want to hear stories like that.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for this incredible, incredible training. I think we're all just swimming in information. We have so many resources to look into. And I want to turn it back over to Marion Dry from Class Act.
This has been extraordinary. We have learned so much, and I think that we have some calls to action ourselves. The first one is you've heard a lot, you've learned a lot, and there are options for taking action. And so think about what would work for you that we've just heard and try to take some action. I also encourage you to share the videos and resources from this, which will be available within a week with family members and friends. And just remember that sharing them with people will have a great impact on their getting interested in engaging with this. Also, please do help the National Immigration Project by supporting Justice Aid. 100% of the money that goes to Justice Aid goes to the grantee partners. So it's money well spent. And the concerts are fantastic, or just donate. And finally, I want to say something that is more general in democracy, and make sure that you vote locally in your local elections. I have a local election this weekend, and I've just moved to a new town, and I'm going to vote in this town for the first time, and I'm very, very pleased to be doing so. But also vote in the midterms. Remember that participatory democracy is only effective if we participate. I want to thank you, Sirine, Caitlin, and Gracie, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge and teaching us so much about this. The work you're doing is extraordinary. I also want to thank our colleagues at Justice Aid, particularly Kim Coaxum, Natalie Jowett, founder and classmate Steve Milliken, and Ray Conley, as well, and importantly, thank again Class Act board member Therese Steiner, who put this in action and made it happen. I also want to thank our production team, and that's John Noren, Diana Labanchu, Kate Freed, Katie Marinello, and our videographer, Rick Brotman. And finally, I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening.